Hello, everyone. Welcome. Hope you're having a good evening. My name is Roland, so I'll be your host tonight. So thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're with us. And also with me tonight, we have Ronald. So let me switch over to Ronald. Yeah, it sure is. Let me. It sure is. Yeah, exactly. So just to make sure, if you're on the live stream, can you hear us? Can someone just indicate on the live stream that you can hear us? Just put you can put on the chat. Give us a thumbs up or something so we know that you can hear us. If you can't hear us, then we need to fix it. William can't hear Ron. Okay. Oh, all right. Can you say something, Ron?
Hello. How is it now?
Okay. How is it now? I think you should be able to hear him now. Still can't hear Ron. Okay, can you say something, Ron?
Yep. Testing. Can you hear me? Is it still muted? Oh,
okay, it's good now. Okay, awesome.
Fixed.
Thanks, William. All right. Okay, so just quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. My name is Roland Texan. I'm one of the mentors at Game of Apps, and Ronald beside me here is also one of the mentors at Game of Apps. I've been a software developer for, I guess, almost 30 years now in the industry. Yeah, I've seen lots of things, and I've been quite excited with the Game of Apps program for the last 4 years. So this is the first time that we're doing a live stream over the summer. So we're really excited. Ronald, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Again, I'm Ronald. I'm one of the dev mentors who's been with Game of Apps for a number of years now. And yeah, this last season, in season 4, Roland and I did a lot of dev challenges. So you might have seen us around the channel. But this summer, Roland is spearheading a new format called Let's Build an App. So I thought I'd drop in to be the first guest.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Ronald. So I'd like to hear, as I mentioned in the promo videos, we'd like this to be highly interactive. So as you know, we're going to be building an iOS app, a simple game, but it's not just us building it. We want you to be involved in the whole process. So we want it to be highly interactive. So we want your input. If you have any questions, we want you to be asking questions. If you have thoughts on how maybe we could do something better, we want to hear from that. So together we'll build the app. So it's over the next 8 weeks. And hopefully by the end of the 8 weeks, depending on how it goes, if it's ready, we could actually submit it to the App Store and have it go into production. So that's quite exciting. So I want to hear from some of the students and the people that are online. So maybe if you don't mind, you can type into the chat. You could tell us what city you're from, and whether you're in high school or elementary school, or if you're finished high school. So if you want to start typing that in, that would be great, and we could say hi to you. So this past season in Game of Apps, we covered Android development. So this app that we're going to build today is an iOS app. So we did iOS in our first couple seasons of Game of Apps, but since then we've been doing Android. So for a lot of the students, iOS would be different. And also, there's probably people here that are that haven't gone through the Game of Apps program. All right, so we have William, who's from Richmond, and he's finished high school. Hello, William. Nice to see you again. William is of course also one of the students that in our Game of Apps program this past season, and William was part of the team that actually won the provincial championships. So congratulations, William. And we have Ryan. Ryan is from New Westminster. He's in high school. Welcome, Ryan. We're glad that you can join us today. And Ronald, why don't you say hi to Adrian?
Adrian. Yeah, Adrian's from Richmond as well, and he's going into grade 8. So yeah, welcome.
Yeah, welcome. So if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself yet, please feel free to type into the chat, and you can introduce yourself that way, and we'll bring it up as you do that. So I just want to give a quick overview of what to expect, both for tonight and also for the remaining 7 weeks. 8 weeks, and it's just 1 hour per week, right? 8 weeks is 8 hours is actually not a very long time to build an app. So what you should expect to get out of this, and I'll ask you later what you any other things that you have expectations on. But what you should expect to get out of this is to get an overview of how you would build an iOS app. Okay, so I'll be driving a lot of the coding using Xcode, using the Swift programming language. I won't be going through every single line of code, because if we did that, we're going to run out of time. Even if we had 3 hours tonight, I think that probably won't even be enough time to do that. So what we'll do is we'll show you what we're doing. So you'll get to see the tools, you'll see the code, and we'll actually dive deep into some of the code that we're going to go into, but we won't go through all the code, because again, otherwise we're going to run out of time. So what that'll give you is it'll give you an overview of kind of, okay, this is how one would build an iOS app. These are the processes that you need to follow. These are the things that you need to consider. So that's what you'll get out of it. For some of you, let's say William, who's done Android development, it'll be very interesting because you'll get to see, okay, this is how it's done differently from Android. For the others, maybe who hasn't done any coding before, then it'd be interesting because you'll get to see, okay, I never actually understood what it takes to build an app, and now I can see a little bit of how it's done. And you'll be able to understand some of the things. A lot of the things you may not be able to understand right off the bat, but that's okay. This is just meant to be an overview, and hopefully it'll get you interested enough to say, yeah, this is something that I'd like to pursue more. Yeah.
Just to give some context, 1 hour a week for 8 weeks. The students normally during the season, they have 3 hours a week, and the curriculum is at least 12 weeks before they get started on building their own apps. So you can see how, for this constraint, in this kind of 8 week, 1 hour periods, it would be hard for us to really build a full app from scratch and to get it to a state where we can submit to the App Store. So, if you want to follow along, by all means, but you'll need to put in a little bit of extra homework to match our speed going through every week.
Yeah. So it'll be a bit fast. We'll be typing, but what we'll do is at the end of each session, we're going to give you access to the whole source code, so you could actually look at the whole source code. But you probably won't be able to type along and follow along on your own as we're typing it in, because we won't have time for that. But we'll give you the source code at the end, and then you can look at it, and you can even try to run it on your own. So that's one. The second thing is that in iOS and the whole Apple ecosystem, they have something called test flight. So what we'll do is that at the end of each week, we will make the app that we've built so far available to you on test flight. So it's basically it's a mechanism that Apple uses for you to beta test pre-production code. So if you have an iOS device, you can install test flight on it, and then we'll register you onto our test flight account, and then we'll be able to push the app onto your phones or iPads, and you'll be able to run it through test flight. So even though it's not in the App Store yet. There's a comment from Smile. Android users, rest in peace. You want to address that, Ronald?
Well, if you're, for this 8 weeks, we're going to be focusing on iOS, but we can always look into doing Android in the future. And as always, come join us for season 5. We're going to continue doing Android during the regular season. So, if mobile development is something you're interested in, join us for season 5.
Yeah, awesome. That's right. So Smile, I don't know if you've had a chance yet, but if you go to our website and you click on the links to the championship website, you'll be able to see a bunch of Android apps that last season's students built. And the one that William built, William introduced himself earlier. The one that William built won the provincial championships. It's quite a involved app, and that was all in Android. So yeah, no. So even though I'm a heavy Apple user, I'm not biased against Android at all. Ronald's laughing. You don't believe that statement?
If only they can see behind the screens on how many Macs you have in front of you right now.
Oh, okay.
They will know.
Okay. Actually, I think I could show them that. If you want to see behind the scenes, I'm just going to give you a quick shot of behind the scenes. So this is what I have here running the, I guess this is my studio. So I've got 1, 2, 3 Macs and 1 iPad in front of me. All right. Okay. So without further ado, I guess we can get started. So what we're going to do today, we're going to start off by, I guess, sketching out what we want to build. So the initial idea that I had was to build something simple like an air traffic controller app, where you're controlling the airplane. Oh, Smile says, "Whoa." Let's do that then. So I'm going to do a split screen here. So in the middle of the screen here, what you'll see is basically my iPad, and I'm just going to sketch on the iPad, right? So I'll just draw. Okay, excuse my drawing. I'm a developer and not a designer. So drawing is probably my, not my top 100 skills. Okay. So I'm just going to draw a plane. So imagine this is a plane. Okay. So on the game board, you'll have a number of planes. So here you have a plane, and the plane has a specific destination, right? So you're the air traffic controller. There's a plane in your airspace. You control this airspace, and your job is to guide these planes to get to where they need to go. Maybe in the game board, you might have an airport. So this is a runway here. So some planes might want to be landing on the airport, and some planes might just be passing through your airspace. So we're going to have like specific points outside your airspace where you can direct a plane to, and then presumably once they get to that point, you'll hand them off to another airspace, and so some other air traffic controller will take over and guide that plane to its ultimate destination. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's kind of what I was thinking initially. Just a simple game. There's going to be animation, so the planes need to move. We need to be able to do that. You need to be able to guide the plane to the destination. So what's Justin, one of our mentors, suggested was that maybe because it's a touch-based interface, the user can use their finger to kind of draw a path on how they want the plane to get to its destination. So that's how we would indicate the plane's destination. So you click on the plane, you draw its path, and then the plane would follow that path to get to its destination. So if let's say we want the plane wants to land on this airport, then we can say there's some sort of beacon at the end of this runway. And as long as we can guide the plane to that beacon, then once the plane gets to that beacon, then the pilot will take over and land the plane onto the runway. Okay, so that's at a high level, that's kind of what I was thinking. So I want to open it up. Any thoughts from the audience? Any thoughts from you, Ronald? Because I don't want to be building my app. I want us to build our app, so collectively. So if you guys have any thoughts, then we can please type it in the chat, and we can discuss that. And if there are ideas better than this, then for sure let's adopt it. Of course, it's the constraint is that it's something that we should be able to build in 8 weeks. Okay, so I guess Ron, any thoughts so far on what I've sketched?
I mean, overall, I mean, this is very an interesting concept. I think I feel like I've played similar games before.
Yeah,
So
I'm sure you have. Yeah.
so I guess without looking at those games to kind of get inspiration, it's going to be interesting to see how we differ from, I guess, the end result, and how we simplify the game mechanics, because flying a plane in real life, there's a lot of complexity and nuance. So how do we shrink that down into a game format?
Yeah.
Yeah, the execution is really the key.
Yeah. So people in the audience, in the live stream, feel free to put in comments and type it in. We'd love to get your input, for this design. So it's kind of almost like a blank slate right now. So you have a chance to put in your thoughts on how you think this could work better. So while you're doing that, I could talk about maybe different phases. So we're going to build this game in phases, right? Because what we want is at the end of each week, we have something that works, right? Maybe not the full game, but something that works, right? So what I'm hoping to do is by the end of tonight, we'll be able to have an app that shows me the plane and allows me to draw a path. Okay. So that's my first goal for tonight, right? And then next week we'll add more capabilities and more functionalities. Maybe next week we'll add the capability to animate the plane, so the plane would actually follow the path and move to where it needs to go.
Cool.
So yeah. So I was also thinking part of this phase development is to have different levels of difficulty. So what I drew here would be the easy mode. So a plane shows up, you draw its path, and then the plane follows the path to get to where it gets to. If you have multiple planes, so pardon my drawing again, but let's see, here's another plane. So if you have another plane, so let's make this a bit more specific. Let's label these beacons so that the plane can indicate where it wants to go, right? So if, let's say, this one needs to go to A, then we can put an A there. So we know that the plane needs to get to destination A. And then we have another plane here. Let's say it needs to get to destination B, right? So then you could also draw a path for that plane to get to B. But you notice here, potentially they could collide, right? So that's something that our game needs to be able to detect. But also as a player, that's something that you need to avoid, right? So it doesn't mean that your paths can't cross, but it just means that those two planes can't be in the same spot at the same time, or else they would collide. Okay,
do we let them collide if on easy mode?
On easy mode, I guess so. That's how the game ends, right? If two planes collide, then it ends, and then you tally up your points. Oh, Smile has. How about workers that you need to avoid? Oh, that's interesting. So what do you mean by workers? What's a worker? So Smile, if you can put in what you think, what you mean by worker. Yeah, so what I'm thinking is the points would be how many planes you've safely guided to their destination. So your points keep going up until you get a collision, and then the game ends. Okay, so Smile says, like NPCs that move around and slow mo. Okay. So planes are other things that are moving around, but you don't control them. But you still need to avoid them, or else you'll collide with them. I think that's what Smile means. Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think, Ronald?
I mean, maybe, but I guess the focus for this app, I think, was that we're kind of just controlling the planes, right? Like the
Yeah.
I guess unless there's computer planes that come in, maybe.
Yeah, I guess that's the NPCs, right?
Yeah.
Computer planes or giant birds that you need to avoid, or drones, I guess.
Adrian
What?
has a question.
Ah, this is a good question, Adrian. Can you redraw the path once you have drawn a path? Yeah, I think we should allow them to do that. What do you think, Ronald?
Um, yeah, I think that's a good stretch goal. Like, I think at least initially, I mean, technically speaking, I think just getting the path drawing working first, and then we can always expand and, figure out the mechanic for redrawing the path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point, Adrian. And I think it makes sense. William seems cool for added difficulty. William, are you referring to the workers, the NPCs? I think that's what William is probably referring to. Yeah. Okay. He says yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's something that we can look at adding for a future version. Not initially, but if we have time, sometime in the 8 weeks, because what that means is that these have to be computer controlled uh, objects, right? So yeah. Okay. So yeah, so this is the easy mode. I'm thinking maybe for the difficult mode, maybe we can introduce the concept of an altitude. So maybe we could have like 4 or 5 levels of altitude. And so if let's say plane A is I'm just choosing a number. Let's say altitude 100, and then plane B is in altitude 300. Then even if they cross paths here, if they're at different altitudes, then they won't collide because one is higher than the other. So potentially that could be something for a difficult mode. For the easy mode, they'll all be in the same altitude and they'll all be the same velocity. So that's altitude. Maybe in a difficult mode, we could also have the speed. So if you see that they're approaching each other, you can ask one of the planes to increase their speed so that they'll pass that line sooner. So then they'll avoid the collision. Because these are probably the variables that I'm thinking and the air traffic controller would be playing around with as well, right? So if these are the variables that they play around with, then it's something that we potentially could introduce in more difficult modes. But we'll see how far we can get with the easy mode, and these are possible future features.
I
All
do
right.
think that the mechanic would be quite complex with, altitude, because now you're adding an extra kind of dimension almost. So it's something to consider.
Yeah.
You also kind of have to get the mechanic right, because otherwise it would be very frustrating if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely it introduces complexity. So that's why that's why I was thinking that would be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it could be like a stretch goal. I mean, even if we don't get there, it might still be okay for a release one, right? Okay. So people in the audience, if you have any other thoughts, keep typing them in. Ronald, any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I think we got a good kind of
Good start.
kind of base to start. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll get started with this, and then of course, as we go through week by week, we can revise and refine some of these. But I think we could start coding based on this. Okay, great. Okay, so let me switch over. Just give me 1 second here. So I'm going to switch over to my computer now so we can run Xcode. All right. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I think you should be able to see my screen. So I'm going to start Xcode, and I'm going to create a new project. So as I mentioned before, we might go a little bit fast, but that's okay. You'll be able to watch this video again afterwards. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always post it on the comments of this video afterwards too. So product name, let's call it air traffic controller. So that's just a placeholder now. So people in the call, if you have an idea for a cooler name, let us know, and maybe we'll if we have a number of names that people suggest, maybe we could put it up for a vote to see what's the come up with the best name for this. All right, so I've just created an Xcode project. So I'm going to let it run on an iPhone, iPad. I can also let it run on a Mac. So Apple now has this capability called Catalyst that allows you to run iPad apps on a Mac. So, all right, so we've created our project. So there's a number of things that Xcode automatically creates for me. So I'm not going to go over a lot of these, but the main thing here is the storyboard. So the storyboard is basically a graphical view that allows us to lay out our user interface, basically. Okay, so this first one here is called view controller, and this view controller corresponds to this class called view controller here. So this is a Swift file, and then this is a storyboard file. Okay, let me just turn this on so you can see me. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is view controller was just a generic name that the Xcode created for us. So I'm just going to rename it. So I'm going to, since this is our main screen, so I'm going to call it the game board view controller. All right. So the nice thing about Xcode, when I renamed it there, it renamed it everywhere too. Okay, awesome. So in this game board view controller, we have an initial view. So the view is just empty right now. So what I'm going to do is let's give it a background color. So let's give it a green color. So that's our background color. And then we'll add a plane. So what I've done is I've created some graphics here. I have an airplane. It's a PDF file. So it's basically just a plane. And the outside of the plane is transparent. So within the black border is white, and then the outside is transparent. So I'm going to add that, but I can add it as a number of things. So you can see here. Normally, when you add a graphic, it'll be an image view. But in this case, as Adrian mentioned earlier, we want to be able to select the plane and change its path, right? So what I'm going to use instead is a button, because I want to be able to tap on this plane, and I want to be able to detect the user taps on it. So I'm going to add a button. Okay, so that's the button there. I don't want it to have any text. So instead of a system button, I'll create a custom button. And I'll remove the text. And for the image here, oh, I haven't added the image yet for this airplane. So let me do that first. Okay, so I'm going to import this image into Xcode. The way to do that in Xcode is I create an image set, and I'm going to name this airplane. Okay. So there's 3 resolutions normally for single and double and triple resolution. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to just use 1 scale, because I'm using a PDF, and a PDF is a vector file. So it'll scale it appropriately. Okay, so I just drag the airplane into here. So now you can see the image there. Okay, so let's go back to the storyboard. And where's my button? Okay, so you see my button is there, but I can't see it now because I deleted the text on that button. So another way to get to it is to navigate here on the left side, and I can see my button still there. So when I select that button, you can see the outline here. Okay, so then when I click on this image, now it knows that I have an image called airplane. And I can click on that, and there's my plane. Okay, great. Now it's a little bit big. So let me make it smaller. So I can drag it to make it smaller. And you can see it gives me the dimensions, right? So we can make it whatever dimension we want. Let's say 60. So Apple has some guidelines in that if you want something to be tappable, they say the minimum size should be 44 points. If it's smaller than 44, you can still tap it, but their guidelines say that it's just harder for the user to tap it. So this one is 60 here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm also going to set that here. So these are constraints. So I'm going to set the width and height to 60. So I'll add those constraints. And then you'll see that it's still red. And the reason it's in red is because it says I don't have an X position and a Y position specified, because I basically just dragged it in, right? So let me give it an X and a Y position. Okay, so I'm going to constrain it to the top level view. So I'll say that it's 76 from the left of the top level view, and 432 from the bottom. Okay, so I've added those 2 constraints, so then the error is gone. All right, so I'm going pretty fast, but if you have any questions, people in the audience, please feel free to type it into the chat. Okay. All right, so we've drawn our plane. We have our field. Let's now hook it up with the code. Okay. So Xcode knows that this view controller is my game board view controller. So if I open up the assistant, it'll open up the corresponding Swift class for this view controller. So that's this one here. Okay, the game board view controller. Let me close that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to know when the user taps on the plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control. So I'm typing Control. So I'm going to do a Control click, and I'm going to drag it into my source code here. Okay, so then it's going to ask me, do I want to create an outlet or an action? So I'm going to create an action, and this action would be a plane button tapped. Okay, so what happens here is that when the user taps on this button, this part of my code will be executed. So that's how I know that the user tapped on that plane. Okay, because now it's connected, right? So if you see, if I move my mouse over to this circle here, the plane here gets highlighted. So then it tells me that this method, plane button tap, is connected to this plane button here. All right, so let's just test it out. I'm going to say print plane was tapped. Okay, so whenever the plane's tapped, it's going to print that. So let's run this and see how that looks. All right, so we have my plane there. And if I click on that, so on the console, it says plane was tapped. Okay, so everything's working so far. All right, so far so good. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to draw a path. So if I were to tap on this button, I've selected that plane, and then I want to be able to draw a path to where I want the plane to get to. Okay, so I don't have that yet. So let's see, how do we do that then? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in mathematics, there's something called a Bezier curve. How many of you have heard of what a Bezier curve is? Just let me know on the chat if you've heard of what a Bezier curve is. Okay, Smile says, yeah, you've heard of a Bezier curve. Okay, great. So a Bezier curve is basically some sort of path or curve that you can draw, and there's mathematical formulas that would be used to determine how that path is drawn. So it's what I'm going to do is iOS has a class called UI Bezier path, and it allows you to draw Bezier paths. But someone else has extended that class, and that's one thing nice about Swift that I like, is that you can extend classes. So someone can write a class and you can extend and add functionality to that class. So someone has extended that class here, and I have a copy here called UI Bezier path plus superpowers. So I'm going to drag that into my project. So I'm going to copy items. Okay. So this is from GitHub. So someone has provided this as an open source code. This guy, Maximilian Krauss. And what he's done is that he's taken the iOS UI Bezier path, and he's extended it by adding some additional capabilities. So one capability is knowing the length of that path. So knowing the length of that path is important for us if we're going to be animating our plane over this path, right? So we want to know how long this path is. So each turn, we know how much to move this plane on this path. So knowing the length of that path is good. Knowing the point, this is point at fraction of. So given a percentage of the total path, this will return to me the point. So if let's say I say I want to know the point on this path that's 10% of the path. So I've only traveled 10% of the path, then this will return to me the exact point that's at 10%. So I can give it 50% and it'll give me halfway. Okay. And a whole bunch of other things. So it's a pretty useful class. So I've imported it. So now I can use that. Okay, let's go back here. So I want to be able to draw something. Now, if you look here in my hierarchy, I have my top level view, and then I have a button. I could draw my path in this top level view, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to create another view, and I'm going to draw my path on that one. And this allows me to better kind of separate all the different layers of my drawings. So I have one layer for the planes, another layer for the drawing paths, and so it's easier to keep them all separate. Okay, so I've just added a view here. You'll notice that this view is white. So by default, it's created as white. I'm going to make it transparent. Okay, so I'm going to select this view. Let me name this view because now I have two things called views. So that's confusing. So I'm going to name it. So this would be the trace. I'll call it the trace path view because this is where the user would be tracing their finger. So trace path view. Okay, so that's trace path view. And instead of the white background, let's give it a transparent background. Okay. Great. So far, so good. I want this trace path view to be above the button. Or I mean, so what's below here sits on top of the button. Okay, so that's my trace path view. And then the last thing I want to do is I'm going to create another class here. Trace path view. Okay, so this class would correspond with that trace path view that we just created. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste code that I've previously written. So I won't go through all of this, but let me just explain some of these things here. So this trace path view is a subclass of a UI view. It has the ability to clear. So that means if I call this clear method, then it will erase the view. And so it'll be ready for me to draw a new path. So what Adrian was asking before, right? Should we allow them to redraw a new path? So this is one way, right? We'll need to clear this view, and then you can draw a new view. Now, these are the important things to look at here. Touches began, touches moved, and touches ended. So touches began is called when the user's finger taps on this view. So the moment the user's finger touches this view, this touches began will be called. Okay. And then as long as the user's finger is still on this view and the user starts moving their finger on the view, then touches moved will be called. Okay. And then finally, when the user lifts up their finger from the screen, then touches ended will be called. Okay, so those three methods are pretty important. So touches began, the user's finger touches the screen. Touches moved, the user hasn't lifted their finger, but they've moved to a new location. So presumably touches moved will be called many, many times. And then touches ended would be when the user lifts their finger off of the screen. Okay, so those are the important methods. So what we do here, I won't go line by line, but the important thing that I'm doing here is I'm taking the location. So the first point is the location that the first touch appeared in. So if the user's finger landed on coordinates x equals 50, y equals 50, then that'll be the first point. Okay. And then what we do then here is that we add this first point to something. We call a method called add point to add this first point. Okay. And what does add point do? Add points adds that point into an array of something called a line array, which is here. Okay. So this is an array of points. So that's our internal data structure here. It's an array of points. When the user taps on the screen, we put the first point into this array. And then when the user's finger moves to a new point, we take that new point and then we add it to that point array. So as the user's moving their finger, we're going to keep adding points to this array. And then finally, when the user lifts their finger off of the screen, then using all those points in the line array, we create a Bezier path. Okay, so our Bezier path is created at the very end once we've collected all the points that the user has touched. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, please post a comment and in the chat, and I'll answer your questions that way. Then the last thing it does here is that it calls trace path completed. Okay, so this is a way we need to communicate back to our game board view controller that the user has finished tracing the path, and we're giving it the Bezier path that we created based on the points that the user has touched. Okay, so that's that trace path view, trace path view. So what I'm going to do now is I'll go back to the storyboard, see this trace path view. If we look at its class, it's still a UI view. So I'm going to change it to a trace path view. Okay, so now Xcode knows that this view here is no longer just a generic UI view. It's actually a trace path view. And we said that trace path view is a subclass of UI view here. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. Now let's add some more lines of code, and then we'll go and run this. Actually, let's see this. I'm going to try something. So trace path view is here. Okay, let's try running this now. Let's see if it works. Okay, so nothing's happening, right? So let's see what's happening here. So I was trying to draw on top of it, and nothing's happening. Okay, the reason nothing is happening is because all these methods calls a should trace, and so it needs to know whether it's allowed to start tracing. So let me add some code here. So this game board view controller and the trace path view needs to communicate with each other. So the way it's going to communicate is something called a delegate mechanism. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, let me just comment these out, and let's just make it return true for now. Okay. So right now we'll say each time the user tries to draw on the screen, it'll allow it to draw. Okay. Let me also add so we have our trace path view here. I'm going to add an outlet for this so that we can refer to this trace path view. Okay, so now I have an outlet here that corresponds with this trace path view. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell the trace path view that its delegate is me. All right, so then this is how we hooked up both the game board view controller and the trace path view so they can communicate with each other. So we told the trace path view that your delegate is me. So now inside the trace path view, when it's about to do touches began, it's going to say, I'm going to ask my delegate, should I start tracing? So it's going to call this method here, and then I'm going to return true. So that means each time the trace path view asks me, should I start tracing? I will always say yes. Okay, so let's see if that works now. Okay, great. So you see now I can start tracing the path, and it actually draws the path based on what I'm drawing. All right. So that looks good. That's a good accomplishment, but it's not exactly what we want, right? Because we don't want the app to allow the user to just start drawing paths anytime. We want them to only start drawing a path once they've selected a plane, right? So once they've selected a plane, then they can draw the path. If they haven't selected a plane, it doesn't make sense for them to be drawing paths, right? Okay, so let's do that. So the plane is selected here when the plane button was tapped, right? So, I should show you one more thing before we. If you notice here, I'm tapping on this plane, but this print statement is not being executed. Does anyone know why? Any guesses from the audience? Remember previously, before I added the trace path view, I can tap on this and we can see that plane was tapped. But now, after I added the trace path view, when I tap on this plane button tapped is no longer being called. Does anyone in the audience know why? Or any guesses? I'll wait a few seconds to see if there's any guesses. Okay, I'll give you the answer. The reason is because you see the buttons here. I put the trace path view on top of the button. So if the button was here, I put the trace path view on top of it. So now when I tap where the plane is, the trace path view is the one that's getting the tap, not the plane button, because the plane button is now underneath the trace path view. Yeah, that's right. So Adrian says trace path view is on top of plane. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So that's why it's not getting that. It's not getting that that tap. Okay. So what I'm going to do then, there's a few ways to do that. We can move trace path view below the plane button, but I don't want to do that because I want the trace path to show up on top of the plane. But what we can do is that we can make the trace path view disabled until the user taps on the plane. So the moment the user taps on the plane, we can enable the trace path view. And then once the user has finished tracing the path, then we can disable the trace path view again. Because we only want the trace path view to be active when the user is in trace path mode, right? When they're not in the trace path mode, we don't want the trace path view to be active. And the user gets into the trace path mode by tapping on a plane. Okay, so what we want then is inside here when the user taps on the plane button, we want to enable the trace path mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new method called start tracing path. So rather than putting all the code here, I'm going to create a new method. Start tracing path. Okay. I'm just going to copy some code that I've previously paste that here. Okay, and then I have a new property called isTracingPath. So this is a Boolean. I'm going to start off with false because when we first start up the game, the user is not in tracing path mode. So then we start up with false. And then when the user taps on the button, we're going to start tracing the path. So in start tracing path, the first thing we do is we enter into tracing path mode. So now it's true. We're going to clear the trace path view. So any previously drawn paths, we're going to erase that. And then we're going to display the trace path view. Okay, so let me put in some comments here because you'll get this code. So then I'll put in some comments. So enable trace path mode. Oops. So enable trace path mode. Erase any previously drawn path. And then unhide or enable trace path view. Okay, so when we start tracing our path, we're going to enable trace path mode, erase any previously drawn path, and then we're going to unhide or enable the trace path view. And then conversely, when we stop tracing the path, we're going to disable the trace path mode, and we're going to hide or disable the trace path view. Okay, so we're going to call start tracing path when the user taps on the plane. And then when the trace path view tells us that the trace path is completed. So basically, when the user has lifted their finger off the screen and it's created a Bezier path for us, then we can stop tracing the path at that point. Okay. And then this should trace, instead of always returning true, will now return the mode. So whenever the trace path view asks us, should I be tracing the path? We would return this variable, which would be either true or false depending on what mode we're in. And the mode we're in is set appropriately by these two lines. Okay, so let's try that. Hopefully, if I typed everything correctly, this should work. But if not, then we'll debug it. Okay, so let me try tracing a path. So I'm drawing here right now, nothing's happening because we're in tracepath mode. We're not in a tracepath mode. Okay, I'm going to click on this. Oh, I'm clicking on this plane and nothing's happening still. Okay, and the reason why, I know why, because we haven't done anything here. Remember we said that the tracepath view was on top of the plane button. So this tracepath view, nothing has changed. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to start off with this tracepath view's initial state is hidden. Okay, so I've just checked this hidden here. Remember here in our code, we're toggling is hidden to true or false inside start tracing path and stop tracing path. But the initial value, we want it to be hidden. So that's why I've given it an initial value of hidden here. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so again, I can't draw here. Let me tap on the plane. So now I tapped on the plane. You can see here, plane was tapped, and we're start tracing. So now I can start drawing a path for the plane. And then once I let go, it says stop tracing. And then, yeah, it disappears because we hit it. Okay. So it's 7:58. We were supposed to go till 8. We've got a couple more minutes. But before we end, I want to do one more thing so that we end in a nice spot. So if it's okay with you, we'll go 5 minutes overtime to everyone. I'm going to create another view. So what we just did, what you just saw, was that black line was the path that the user drew. And then after the user lifts their finger, we want that path to now be drawn onto our game board, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that Bezier path and then redraw it onto our game board. And the way we're going to do that is I'm going to create another view. And okay, so we have another view here. And what I'm going to call this the paths view. Okay, so this view will contain all the paths of all the planes that we have in our game board. So all the existing paths. So let me select that and resize it again. Okay, I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm setting the constraints here so that iOS knows how to position this. And then I'm going to also make it clear. Okay, so we have a paths view. Let me create an outlet for this paths view as well. Okay. So what I want to do now is, I think all I need to do is uncomment this. Okay, so what's going to happen is that after the trace path is completed, so let's look at this code here. So I'm going to stop tracing the path, and then I'm going to draw the plane's path onto my game board. And I do that here. Oh, let me take one more outlet. Okay, so I'm going to, after I stop tracing the path, I'm going to draw a plane path called draw plane path here. And what it's going to do is it's going, oh, I have one more property I need to create. Okay, so what happens here is that it's going to create, given the Bezier path that was created, I'm going to create something called a shape layer. And in that shape layer, I'm going to create a path that's equivalent to the Bezier path. It's going to be dark gray. The width of the line will be 5, and then I'm going to add that to my layer. Okay, so let's run that and see how that works. Okay, so again, I'm going to draw onto here, and nothing's drawing. I'm going to click on the plane, and it should say plane was tapped, so we can start tracing. I'm going to draw a path. Then when I let go of the path, you could see that now it's drawn a dark gray path onto my game board. So this dark gray path has been drawn on the paths view. Okay, if I start drawing here, nothing's happening because I'm not in the trace path mode. If I tap on the plane again, I've entered trace path mode again. Now I can draw a new path. You can see that black line is a new path. If I let go, then that new path now replaces my old path. Okay, so that's what Adrian was asking about earlier. All right, so it's 8:02. We can call it a day for now in terms of the functionality. Any questions? Please feel free to type on the chat. While you're doing that, I'm going to show you how you can access the. Where's my browser? I'm going to show you how to access the code. I'm going to give you the GitHub link. Where's my? Okay. So this is the GitHub link. I'm going to post it onto the chat so you guys can have a copy of it. And it's on the screen too. Oh, I guess it got chopped off. It's on the chat anyway. Okay, so that's how you get a copy of the code. And then the last thing I want to say is if you want, Ronald, you're back on screens. If you want to be part of the test flight so that you can install this on your iOS device, what I need is from you is your Apple ID. So send me your Apple ID. It's the email associated with your Apple ID. And I'll add you to the test flight group for this app. And then either sometime tomorrow or maybe Saturday, I'll send out this app, this beta version. So I'll compile this, upload it, and then send it out. And then you'll get a notification on your test flight. So you have to install test flight. Go to the App Store on your iPhone or iPad. Look for test flight. It's an Apple app. Download that. Send me your Apple ID, and then I'll add you to the group. And then once I push out this beta version, you'll be able to get it and install it on your phone without having to wait for it to get to the App Store. Okay, so those are the two things. So if you want to send me your Apple ID, please send it to, I'm going to type in my email address. Okay, so send your Apple ID to my email address, roland@gameofapps.org. I can add you to the test flight, and then by Saturday, you should be able to get a copy of this. And then that GitHub link that I posted on the chat, you can use that to access the source code too. All right. Any questions? Please feel free to post on the chat. We'll be, I guess we're at the end of our live stream now. It's 8:05. Next week, we're going to add some additional stuff to this. So if you come up with some ideas before then, please post it on the comments for this video. So this video will go up on our YouTube channel. You can put comments there, and then we can continue the conversation there. And if something interesting comes up, we can add that to next week's live stream. All right. Any thoughts from you, Ronald?
No, But I'm excited to see where we take this, and give us any suggestions when you play around with this first prototype. Let's build an app together.
Okay, awesome. All right. So Chloe says, okay. Chloe says, thank you so much for your hard work on today's live stream. I can't wait for next week. Awesome. Thank you, Chloe. That's very kind of you. Adrian says, thanks. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Hopefully, that gave you a bit of an idea of the gameplay mechanics. If you have some other ideas on how we can make the game better, let us know between now or next week as well. And we'll build this over the next 8 weeks, as Ronald said. All right. So thanks so much. Have a good evening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.